It's a great honor to speak with Bobby Sumberg. Bobby received an MA and PhD from the University of Minnesota, Department of Design, Housing and Apparel. Research for both of these degrees in textile studies was conducted in West Africa. She currently holds the position of Curator of Textiles and Costume at the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and has curated several exhibits, including Needles and Pins, Textiles and Tools, and many others. She recently authored the book Textiles, Collection of the Museum of International Folk Art, and is co-author of Sleeping Around, The Bed from Antiquity to Now. She has published articles on dress and textiles of Nigeria and Côte d'Ivoire, and on ethnic dress as well as research on the museum collection. The Macedonian Heritage Hour traveled all the way to New Mexico to find out about a fantastic project. First of all, Bobby, it's a great honor to speak with you. Tell us about where we are and what this exhibition is.
We are here in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the Museum of International Folk Art. And we are in the Coatzin Gallery, where the gallery is today hosting Young Brides and Old Treasures, Macedonian embroidered dress. This exhibit, we put it up in October of 2011, and it'll be here until January 2013, so just a little bit over a year. And we are really proud and really pleased to have this exhibit here in Santa Fe.
Tell us about the genesis of this project. From what I understand, the Macedonian Arts Council and Pavlina Proevska had a big part in the beginning of this project. Tell us about, from your perspective, how it all started.
Well, several years ago, I got a phone call from New York from Pavlina Proevska, and she was visiting here in Santa Fe and wanted to talk to me about the possibility of creating a collection of Macedonian dress here in the museum. And so we met and we talked, and over the years the project actually happened, came into fruition here. And that project consisted of contacting donors and creating a collection that would be suitable for an exhibit and a book published. And that, I think, Pavlina probably contacted me in about 2002 or 2003, so it's been a long time coming. It's a long project.
That's great, and it's fantastic. I'm very impressed. I spoke with Pavlina, and she talked about the fact that it took a long time to organize this exhibit, and that the real value will be that not only will be seen, according to her, 100,000 visitors, but it will be, these costumes will be preserved for a very, very long time, and they may be shown at other exhibits as well.
Yeah, exactly. We now have, with this collection, we now have the best collection in the United States, I believe, particularly of complete outfits. It's very rare in museum situations to get complete ensembles of dress. Mostly collectors will collect the most beautiful part where the most embroidery is, for instance, but then neglect the headscarf, which might not be so well decorated. But we've had two really remarkable collectors who collected everything, as much as they could find, all the different parts. And so we have been able to put this together uniquely here. And we do hope that it travels. We are working on that right now.
There's a beautiful book, and I've seen the book. I have a copy of it now. It's fantastic, and hopefully Macedonians in Toronto will be able to purchase it and see for themselves this beautiful exhibition if they're not able to come to Santa Fe in person. And from what we understand, Pavlina mentioned to us that to thank the following people: Alex Kormushev, Emil Christov, Mike Zafirovsky, Jordan Bitov, and Risto Gushterov, who were contributors towards the publication. Tell us about the book itself, and how does it represent the actual exhibition from your perspective?
Well, the book itself is actually larger than the exhibition. We cannot show everything that we have in our collection here in the gallery. And so one of the reasons for doing a catalog is to show things that add to what we have on display in the gallery but couldn't be included. So for instance, we have two complete outfits of men's dress from Macedonia, but those pieces did not fit the concept in this gallery, and as you can see, there really wouldn't have been room. The gallery is pretty full as it is, but those are in the book, so that there is some representation there. We worked with my favorite photographer to work with here in Santa Fe, and had created some really beautiful photographs. One of the other possibilities that you can do with a book that is harder to do in an exhibition is to have really close-up details of the textiles, particularly of the embroidery, so that people are not allowed to get that close to the mannequins here or to the pieces, so that but they can actually see the texture and see the kinds of stitches that are used. Another aspect of creating a book is so that there can be more information. An exhibit is essentially a visual experience. You know, there's text, you can read as much as you can here, but the volumes of information that we have that were contributed by the Macedonian scholars, there's nowhere to put that in an exhibit. So it adds a whole extra dimension, several dimensions actually, when you can have a book at the same time.
Tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project from the beginning, as far as the preparations that went into bringing these beautiful pieces from Macedonia and from donors, you know, throughout the world, throughout the United States, to this beautiful exhibition. How did that happen?
Well, it's a long process, and what happens is there's usually quite a bit of negotiation between me as the curator and possible donors. Pavlina introduced me to the two main donors here, Ron Wixman and Bernard Ziobro, and then, so in the process of that, I went to visit them and to see what they had. You know, we also had to analyze what we had in the collection to begin with, because we had several pieces, actually quite a bit from Macedonia before this project even started. And so it's analyzing and thinking about what we need, what is available, what the donors have, what they're willing to give, how they're willing to give. So for instance, one of our donors gave several full outfits one year, and then the next year he gave some more. He didn't do it all at once, whereas another one of our main donors gave just about everything all at once. As well, I traveled to Macedonia twice and made some purchases while I was there. And those were purchases of things that generally the collectors of the time had not acquired. And so we wanted to round out the exhibit. In the process of, so before we photographed, before we made the book and before we made the photographs, we had the help of an expert in Macedonia who came and spent 2 weeks here in Santa Fe to sort out what we had, make sure that everything was time period appropriate, and that all from the same right places that they should be from, and dress the mannequins so that what you see in this exhibit are really they're dressed as they would have been dressed in their time period.
What is his name?
Vladimir Yanevsky, and he lives in Skopje, and he, as well, he brought pieces with him from the eastern part of the country, because those places were not represented in our collection at that time.
Tell us about some of the places that these pieces are from, some of the geographical villages and so on that they're from the Republic of Macedonia.
We try to represent most of the country, and of course, the western part of Macedonia, the west of the Vardar River, is really, really well known for the variety and the richness and the decoration of the dress. So we have a section from the Upper Vardar, from the Skopje region. We have these pieces here from the Debar region and Reka, and where they're just remarkable with the color and the numbers of layers. as well as from Mariovo and Bitola and Prilep in that area. Two of the areas that we didn't have represented in the collection that came from Macedonia with Vladimir were from Pianets, the Shop area, and from the Ovčepole, okay.
Ovčepole.
And from the Ovčepole area, right.
Tell us more about the preparation for actually having the pieces displayed in this beautiful collection. Tell us from the very beginning how the pieces were put together and how they were displayed, and maybe some of the panels. How did all that come together with the lighting as well?
As I said, we had a consultant, Vladimir Yanevsky, come from Skopje, and he dressed the mannequins. During that time, we took video and photographs of what he was doing and extensive notes of how the outfits were actually put together. Because as some of your watchers might know, some of your viewers might know, there's many layers and there's a particular order that the clothing has to go on. So that when it came time to dress the mannequins for the actual exhibit, I did that with an assistant. And we were able to dress about 5 a day. We had to have special mannequins made that are the right shape. Sometimes if you go to see an exhibit on contemporary designers and fashion, they can use mannequins from a store, but the mannequins from a store are a completely wrong shape for these people and these clothing. So we had to have special mannequins made, and then they were each one of these has been modified in its own way to make the clothing fit the best and look as it does now. So there's some padding here, there's a little carving there. One of the things that Vladimir told me that really made a very big difference in how we put these things together was that all of the clothing that was put on and all of the belts that go around the waist and around the torso were there to make a beautiful, smooth platform for the apron, that the apron was to be the focal point. And so everything underneath made just a really wonderful display for the apron. So that concept actually helped us very much in terms of dressing the mannequins. We work with a designer who, when I said to her, one of the important things for this exhibit is that each mannequin be seen from all angles, because often the backs are as interesting as the fronts. That said to her, okay, we have no platforms up against the walls, we don't need vitrines in front of the platforms, that we arrange the space in such a way that there's a kind of a path to walk through, but not a labyrinth or any kind of walls that are really hiding. I had an idea before I even talked to the designer that there would be no interior walls in this gallery, that it would just be open. The visitor would walk in and see everything there was to see immediately, because it is just the work is so beautiful and it's almost overwhelming, and that's what I wanted. I wanted people to kind of go, wow, when they walk in, and then take the time and the opportunity to really look.
Well, to be honest, I said wow when I came in, because it is incredible. It is incredible. Did you visit the exhibition several years ago from Baba's Hope Chest in Toronto?
No, I did not see that exhibit. I did see the catalog, the little booklet that was done, and I've seen photographs of it. But
tell us from your perspective, other than what you just described, what would you say is the richest part of this collection? Why is it special in your view? What makes it unique or special as opposed to maybe some other exhibition? What are its strong points?
Well, as I said before, its strong points are really that they are complete outfits. And the time period, we have pieces from about 1860 to 1980. And so that time span is really nice. One of the things that I would like to point out is that creates that ability to be able to look at change over time. And then that encompasses how the economy changed, how people's lives changed, and how history, changes history wrought in a region or amongst people. There's a section here where there are headscarves that are quite old, and then one that's on a mannequin that's from, I believe, the 1920s. And you can see the similarities, you can see the differences. And to me, that's important. It didn't just stop in time, that this kind of clothing was a living, breathing entity. It changed as people changed, and people, the women who made all their own clothing and all the clothing for their family, put their hearts and their souls into it, as well as their fashion sense.
Now, you corrected me earlier today because my first impression was that it was costumes, and that's what many people tend to characterize these outfits as. But you correctly said to me that these are not costumes. This is clothing, and this is what people wore.
Exactly. What we have here on display is generally special occasion clothing, and a lot of it is associated with wedding, because that is the time when women wore the most highly decorated clothing and the most jewelry is when and immediately after they got married, and also immediately before. And so...
Or the svadba in Macedonian, the Makedonska svadba.
Right. And so, yeah, and so it is the most, stunning. In a museum like this, it would be very ideal if we could have some everyday clothes. And when we have put them on display. It's usually just an apron that we have. That's kind of interesting that that's what survived. But everyday clothing often doesn't survive. And that's why these most beautiful decorated clothes are here in the museum. This is not everyday dress.
We're going to very soon be looking at a couple of pieces, and we're going to ask you for your detailed impressions of them. No, but before we get to that, do you have any message for our viewers about why it is important to maybe come out to Albuquerque and to a little bit north of Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and to see this beautiful exhibition? Would it be worth their while to come from Canada?
Oh, absolutely, because the weather here is wonderful. And New Mexico is unlike any place that you could find in Canada. But I think that the Macedonian community in particular would be extremely proud to see this exhibit here. That was our intention, that to honor the ancestors, the women who spent their lives creating these beautiful things, and for whom it was very rich in meaning, as well as the skill that was involved. And I think that everyone, Macedonian and non-Macedonian, can appreciate that and the beauty of it, and hopefully learn a little bit about a part of the world that many people in this country don't know anything about.
Could this exhibition perhaps maybe one day make its way to Canada?
I would love that. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity, and we are working on that for this exhibit to travel to a couple of other museums.
Tell us why you're so passionate about this field that you've chosen. Why the passion?
That's a really multi-layered question. For me personally, this is something I have done handwork all my life. My great-aunts taught me to embroider when I was 5. And it was something that I've been involved in on many different levels. I think that it is, to look at textiles, you can look at so many aspects of life, of history, economy. They were essential in so much of the world economy from ancient times to the present. And they are essential in people's lives and in culture. When you think about your own life, when we think about our own lives, we are surrounded by textiles. Even in your car, you've got upholstery, you've got textile woven belts that run your vehicle. They're everywhere. And it's really, I think, it brings a real richness to life when that awareness of the importance of textiles comes up to the surface a little more for us. What we have here is a wedding dress from Mariovo, and it's one of the most beautiful outfits, although it's really very hard to make that distinction because we have so many beautiful outfits here in this exhibit. But what's interesting about the Mariovo ensemble is the number of layers, the amount of work, and the color scheme. So what you see here is so much red. And really, when most visitors come into the gallery, that's what they are struck by. And that's one of the most common questions that I am asked. Why so much red? And red was a very significant color, and as it is in most places in the world. But in Macedonia, it was very significant, and the red was historically produced by a natural dye using the madder root that was grown there. And it is a long process in order to create this dye. The plant has to grow for several years before it's dug up and processed. And it is my conjecture that part of the reason that red was so important was because it was a difficult color to achieve. Unlike white, which was just there from the cotton or the linen or the sheep, and it could be bleached to become whiter, red required a lot of work. And red is also associated generally with the life force, blood, fertility, power, the sun. So it's a very significant color, and it was worn by brides in particular. And then what you see on this mannequin then is just an abundance of red, because she needed that protection, she needed that strength at this vulnerable time in her life when she was about to get married. The many, many layers create a very heavy, literally a heavy ensemble. When all the jewelry for a bride was worn, and this, although there's quite a bit of jewelry on this mannequin, that's not all the jewelry that would have been worn in a wedding circa 1900. The whole ensemble weighed about between 50 and 75 pounds. Now you can imagine a small woman wearing all of that weight. And why was that? Why was that important? That's a question that I can't answer, but what I can also conjecture in that a woman needed to be strong. She needed to prove that she was able to do all the work that a woman needed to do. And that weight of her clothing was really significant. The embroidery patterns on the sleeves of this chemise and on the neck piece are also very specific to this area. And many of those patterns also evoked much meaning and symbolism. Some of the patterns were called wolf paw, another pattern was called bear paw, and those sort of were evoking the strength and the protection of those animals. And as well is the use of fringe. And in this part of the country, many of these mannequins here, you can see quite a bit of fringe on their clothing. And that fringe was also really protective and really specific. In some of the things that I've read, women of the time associated the wearing of fringe with the waving of grass, tall grass in the breeze, and that connection then to the natural world, and also implicit is a connection to fertility and to a woman's childbearing power. These two ensembles are also from the Bursiak region, but from a little different area than the Mariovo. This mannequin is dressed as a new bride's dress from Strushki Drimkol. And this mannequin is from also a new bride's dress from the Ohrid region, around the city of Ohrid. And one of the things I would point out here is change over time. Now, many of the viewers will know that these two places are very close to each other, about 8 to 10 miles apart. There are some very specific differences in these outfits, but there's also a lot of similarities. Some of the similarities that you can see are the use of velvet and these velvet sleeves, and the use of the metallic embroidery along the front opening of the sleeveless coat. But one of the other differences that you can see is differences in the embroidery. And that has to do more with time than with geographic region. And so this outfit here is a bit older. It's from about 1900 to 1910, and it has extensive embroidery and very specific type of embroidery on the sleeve of the chemise. This outfit is a bit newer, from about 1920 to 1930, and it has a whole different stitch. It's a cross stitch on the sleeves. It's got these floral motifs in the embroidery, and it's much less of it. And that is really significant for change over time. In this period, I think the height of the embellishment and the richness of the dress was at the turn of the 20th century. And as the 20th century moved on, things started to change. People's lives changed. They had different access to resources, to materials, and also politically, World War I, there was a lot of conflict in the area. All of those things make a lot of difference to the kinds of things that women produce. And so it's very nice for us to have these two right next to each other in order to show that, how wider change in the world affects something very local, such as the embroidery on a woman's dress.
It's a great honor to speak with Bernard Ziobro, who is a collector and donor for Young Bride's Old Treasures Macedonian embroidered dress. Bernard, tell us about how you became involved in this exhibition.
I was contacted by first Dr. Ron Wixman and Pavlina Projevska from the Macedonian Arts Council in New York, and they had asked, they knew that I had some costumes, and would I be interested in being a participant and a donor for this show. Initially, I was reluctant. After I talked to Pavlina again and to Ron, I decided to be a contributor and a donor to the exhibit, and I'm very, very happy that I had the opportunity to participate.
Tell us about your interest in these pieces and the Macedonian, for example, the Macedonian clothing.
When I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, surrounded by a very large ethnic community, particularly a Slavic community. And we, in our churches, and we all had dance groups, and in order to preserve our own Slavic culture. Many of my friends were Serbians and Croatians, and some Macedonians and Bulgarians. So I got interested first in the music and the dance of Macedonia and Serbia, and pretty much all of the Balkans.
That's great. Now, tell us about how you got these pieces. Tell us about the genesis of that.
When I served 28 years in the Marine Corps, and when I was in the Marine Corps, I served at the American Embassy in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. One day, a man came in with a trunk, and he had all these costume pieces. That was my first real exposure to Macedonian costumes. He had brought in pieces from Tetovo. He had a košulja, he had a kurdija, he had a yelek. He had just about, it was a complete costume. I was impressed. I was very impressed. And of course, I bought it. So that the very first complete Macedonian costume I ever bought was from a gentleman who just showed up at the American Embassy, and that was my introduction.
That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned in our discussion before we started shooting that you know Jim Nikoloff of Toronto, and tell us about your collaboration with Jim.
Jim did an exhibit. My first introduction or awareness of Jim was from Bubba's Hope Chest at the Textile Museum in Toronto. Once I knew there was going to be an exhibit, I contacted Jim, and from then we became fast friends, both Jim and Dina.
Now, this exhibit is exclusively from the Republic of Macedonia, from the country of Macedonia, but Jim, for example, and from Baba's Hope Chest focused on all parts of Macedonia, including the Lerian and Kostur region of Macedonia. Tell us about your collection, and is it varied? Is it from all parts of Macedonia?
The bulk of my collection is from the current Republic of Macedonia. I do have several pieces from Lerian area, not nearly as much as Jim and Dina, of course, but I do have some pieces. But the costumes there were available because there was so much turmoil in that area post-World War I and up to the Second World War. Many of the costume pieces were not readily available. When you are worried about surviving on a day-to-day basis, these items become secondary. So many of the pieces that were originally available are now gone.
Why the passion for Macedonian clothing, Macedonian pieces?
Not so much. I think the work is incredible, but I think my first attraction to the Macedonian culture was the music.
Ми е голема чест да разговараме со Слободан Томовски, еден од многу малку по број македонци во Нью Мексико, но ни е голема чест да разговараме со вас денеска во Санта Фе, Нью Мексико.
Драго ми е исто да се сретнеме, Бил, и да, имаш право, јас ете сум еден од многу малобројните македонци овде во Албукерке. И во тој смисол, навистина, сакам да кажам дека се чувствувам многу посебно и имам чест да присуствувам и да ја имам оваа прекрасна изложба во Нью Мексико, нели, во Санта Фе. И јас дознав за изложбата откако Павлина Проевска ме информираше и таа беше инволвирана во изложбата. Но сакам да кажам дека сум навистина многу изненаден што овде во овој, да кажам, малку изгубен, далечен
Дивиот
запад од Америка, нели? И каде што нема практично македонци, се случува една ваква прекрасна презентација на македонската историја, наследство, ракотворба, култура и така натаму.
Како дојде до тоа да се селувате овде во Нью Мексико, во Соединетите Американски држави?
Па тоа е малку долга приказна, но во суштина јас сретнав девојка, американка од тука, од Албукерке, кога работев на друго место во Индонезија, значи малку некое глобална некое поместување. Меѓутоа, ете, со неја дојдов тука пред 10 години и можам да кажам дека е навистина еден специфичен дел од Америка и од светот, нели, кој што можеби на прв поглед не е многу значи не отворен. Меѓутоа, ако му се даде малце време, има многу прекрасни работи овде.
Дали ја ширите македонската вистина овде? Меѓу американците?
Па да, сигурно, како не. Всушност, оваа изложба говори за една многу јака желба на луѓето од овде, нели, да представат, да покажат делот од култура која што овде воопшто и нема, како да кажам, нема одзив од бидејќи нема македонци овде.
Нема многу, има малку, меѓутоа, инаку од кој место сте од Македонија?
Јас сум од Скопје.
И кажете ни нешто повеќе за вашите впечатоци, нели, за големата работа на почетокот со Павлина, како таа беше всушност на самиот почеток организаторот на оваа изложба.
Па видете, јас на вистина не можам многу да кажам околу тоа, затоа што јас не бев на вистина инволвиран во поставката на изложбата. Јас си помогнав на Павлина малку во логистички смисол, но знам дека таа работеше и на вистина се ангажираше на сите страни за да ги координира луѓето. И на вистина, еве, вие зборувавте со Бернард и со Боби, кураторот на музејот. Кустосот, да. Значи, и навистина е фасцинантно колку голем труд и координација на луѓето е потребно за да нешто вакво се постави.
Нели е добро што Боби, што инаку не е македонка, толку има знаење, нели, и ја промовира и ја представува македонската култура овде во овој дел на Соединетите Американски држави.
Да, јас сум многу благодарен на Боби, а исто така и на донаторите што возможи ова да се постави овдека. И би сакал да ги поканам сите, македонци и сите други од пријатели од Торонто, од Канада, да дојдат во Санта Фе, во Албукерки, да видат оваа изложба, но исто така да го видат Нью Мексико.
Дали имате на крај, како што уште една порака за македонците, поздрав за македонците во Канада и западниот дел на државата Нью Йорк во Соединетите Американски држави?
Па ве поздравувам сите, ви пракам, ве гушкам и бакнежи и да бидете весели и здрави.
Многу убаво, многу ви благодариме. Еден мост, замислите, драги македонци, помеѓу македонците во Торонто, македонците овде во Соединетите Американски држави, во Санта Фе, Нью Мексико, во Феникс, Аризона и на секаде ни светот. Уште еднаш голема благодарност за вашето учество денеска во ова репортажа.